we need to take a bit of responsibility now and start looking at why we need an ambulance. All ambulances now are quite clear. It says emergency ambulance written all over it. And there's loads of scenarios. That's just one out of many calls where they're nuisance calls. They're not requiring an emergency response at all.
Well, you've been 12 years as a paramedic, in the Lancaster area. For you, have you experienced? Obviously, you're out on the front line. Have you experienced people who've wasted your time when you've actually got?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the stories it's not a story actually. One of the calls that happened to us was we picked up this gentleman in the middle of town centre, rolling around in loads and loads of pain. I treated him as I believed he was in pain because that's my job. We get up to the local hospital, thumbs up, jumps out of the ambulance, says thanks for the lift, and that that happens.
How often?
I would say quite often. People are calling ambulances because they don't really know, or there's nobody else to turn to. The services in the social service settings. We have people who are calling because they're vulnerable. There's just nobody for them to call, so everything gets dropped back to the ambulance service, back to 39s, and then we end up having to respond to these individuals, which we don't mind. But at that time, there then may be a real life-threatening emergency where there is nobody to send to.
Quite clear that that's a nuisance call, but it must be quite hard to determine which is and which isn't, right?
Absolutely. I've heard them myself when I'm in the call centres where you've got people saying, is the patient breathing? Because that's one of the questions. And they'll say, no, the patient's not breathing. And then they'll say, who's the patient? Oh, it's me. Well, you are breathing because you're talking. But
so
unfortunately,
they're lying.
Because of the way the system works, you have to listen to what they're saying. So if they say they're not breathing, that's the tick. Then you're going to get a category on emergency.
And the thing is that the minute that there's been a call like that operator, who was incredibly polite, would then have to go through all the paperwork to say that they'd had a nuisance call. So they're actually off the system whilst they've done their paperwork.
Well, they wouldn't know initially that is a nuisance call. They will take that as a live emergency. So what they will do is they'll go through to our dispatch centre and they'll dispatch an ambulance. Because of the category of call, that will then come through as a Cat 1 emergency.
And so, explain the categories, Martin. How do the categories work?
As you can imagine, one of the earliest and most primary things that we need to do is work out who needs that ambulance first. So that's why they're asking questions when you phone 999 to try and work out the priority and how quickly we need to send a vehicle. And when the person's on the phone, that doesn't mean they haven't yet decided that someone is on their way, but they're trying to get more information. The most life-threatening of calls, this will be people that are actively fitting, they're not breathing, they're in cardiac arrest. The ambulance service has got 7 minutes to get a resource to that patient, to start resuscitation efforts. And then we've got 3 other categories based on the severity of symptoms. And at the bottom of the category is category 4. There isn't any time targets associated, but we look at the outcome. So what was the right thing to be done for the patient, whether or not we were able to manage that patient in the community, refer to their GP, that sort of thing.
I read this morning and I actually came in and checked that the fact was correct. And we both did, didn't we? Have we made a mistake here? Is this actually right? But this is astonishing in itself. From November 2016 to October last year, a total of 8,303 emergency calls were made by the 5 most frequent UK callers.
That's correct.
We double-checked that number.
Well, we thought it was a typo, didn't we?
That's 8,300 calls over by 5 people.
Yep.
So what now? Your mum works in this service, so
we spoke to her this morning.
And she was saying that a lot of times there'll be people with mental health problems, but you look at something like that, the money that must cost, the time that's wasted there, and I think most sensible people would think, right, OK, find them.
Something has gone very, very wrong over the last 10 to 15 years of how we've managed people in the community. Rightfully, there's been this shift to move care from hospitals into the community for a large number of patients, because we know a lot of patients respond very well if they're managed in the community. But that hasn't been followed with the right amount of investment, and there isn't the services there to manage people that may not have a life-threatening emergency, but need medical help.
Yeah.
But 999 is not there as a friend.
No, absolutely, but increasingly they are picking up that work. That 80 to 90% of the people that call 999 don't have a life-threatening emergency but have got nowhere else to turn to. Historically, you'd have your family GP down the road, they'd come out and see you. They're not there to do that anymore. And now people feel that they've got nowhere else to turn to. And we need to look at how we manage these patients.
It's sad that that's even an option. You know, obviously, like you say, there's nowhere else to turn to, but 999 shouldn't be that.
No, but even when we go to patients, you know, I was working this weekend, I turned up at a patient, didn't require an A&E bed. However, I had nowhere else to safely discharge that patient. Nowhere safe. So for me, the only option, default then, is for me to take that patient to hospital. They'll end up staying in hospital all weekend before the scene, possibly by the social service settings, because then they need care in the community. But the problem is there's no funding. The funding there is where the issue is. So when we talk about funding, do we need more ambulances? Let's pile more ambulances out there. We need to take a step right back and we need to make sure when these people hit hospital, when they get discharged from hospital, there is a safe package there available for them.
Do you find that people think they will be treated quicker if they call an ambulance?
They do, but that's strictly not true. Because once we've triaged you and you'll be seen probably later than what you would do if you would attend yourself.
That is a really important point to really stress, that if you phone an ambulance, it doesn't mean that you will be seen quicker. You will be assessed and triaged like any person who turns up at the front door of the A&E. So if you turn up and you walk to the A&E and you've got crushing chest pain and you look pale, you're going to be seen very quickly.
Yeah.
If you turn up in an ambulance and you've stubbed your toe, then you're not going to be seen for a long, long time.
It seems like some people are using it as a form of transport.
They do, and that happens. I'll give you another scenario that's happened to me. We got called, an emergency call from a GP practice. We turned up at the patient's address, knocked on the door, no patient there. Got onto our control centre. Can you find out where this patient is? Yes, stand by, we'll find out. They've rung the GP practice. Yeah, the patient's coming home on the bus. They'll meet you there. So if they're fit to go on a bus back from the GP to home, why don't they just continue it all the way to hospital? Or if it's not a life-threatening emergency where we've responded on blue lights, putting everybody at risk, why not just put them in a taxi and send them directly to hospital?
My uncle used to be an ambulance driver a long time ago, and I remember going around to the station, and they get a shout, and they go out, and then they come back, and they'll have a bit of a break. But there's nothing like that these days, is there?
It's significantly changed in the time that I've been practicing. I started my career in London. I spent 10 years in London, and the demand just has continuously increased. And so now, in a 12-hour shift, there won't be any time between calls. As soon as I finish dealing with one patient, to say we've successfully handed the patient over to A&E or we've managed to find some care package for them at home, there'll be another call waiting for us. In fact, there'll be hundreds of calls waiting.
Is it a career you recommend? Because we also constantly hear about violence towards ambulance
absolutely. Violence is massively on the rise now within the emergency services. And, you know, let's not forget, the ambulance service aren't an emergency service. We're only an essential service, so we're not part of police and fire. We're actually under the NHS. So for me, we need to remember the nurses as well, because we then take that potentially violent patient that's probably assaulted us, if they've not been arrested, to the A&E department, and then they also get assaulted
the same.
as well.
And answering your point about is it a job to recommend, I still think I've got the best job there is. It's absolutely amazing, because the times that you really do make a difference. And on the one end of the scale, that might be successfully resuscitating someone who's had a cardiac arrest and getting to meet them when they've been discharged sometime later. But also, you might go to an older, more vulnerable patient that, because of various situations, is left alone, has got no one to talk to, is feeling lonely, is feeling depressed, and you can link them up to other services and completely turn their life around. And that's a really positive feeling you get to take away. And yeah, we're here on your sofa talking about all the hardships and the things we've got to overcome, and we all work to overcome them, but it's still a fantastic job. I love it.
Well, Department of Health and Social Care spokesman said we're supporting the ambulance service to deliver the response patients need in emergencies, including investing more than £36 million for trust this year to buy 256 new vehicles. Interesting point that you made earlier on, though. And introducing improved performance standards. The NHS long-term plan, together with our historic funding commitment for the health service, will see frontline services improve and put the health service on a long-term sustainable footing, backed by an extra £20.5 billion a year by 2023/24. Can we just say on behalf of, I glanced down and had a look at the comments.
Lots of comments.
Everybody, saying you guys are incredible. You're here representing an entire service, all our emergency service. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
And please do think twice about dialing 999 and why you call, and because the time that you actually need it, somebody else might be mucking about and delay the ambulance coming to you.
Absolutely that.